Good. Let me start
Yeah.
talking. Good morning. Can people hear me? Vlad, can you say hello?
Hi, everybody. Sorry for all the delays. It's wonderful to see you, most of you, many of you, and greetings from Ohio, greetings to New Jersey. It's so good to see your faces.
Cantor, Lapin, this is Bob Males. I'm filling in for Alan Lieber this morning as sort of interim host of this event. And first of all, we want to welcome you and thank you so much for, excuse me, joining us this morning. It's always wonderful to see you again. And we're really happy to be joined by your congregation in Ohio, and I'm hoping that everyone can hear us. I assume if you can, everyone else can as well.
Yep, we're good, Bob.
Awesome.
Okay. So again, I'm Bob Males. I'm the former, most recent former Barnert Temple Men's Club president. Alan Lieber is the current president and not able to be with us this morning. Excuse me. So I'm going to read his notes on how we were going to run this today, his introduction and all, and then we're going to get started very shortly. So we are, as I mentioned, I was personally thrilled, but we're all thrilled to see our old friend Vladimir Lapin, who's the cantor at Fairmount Synagogue now in Ohio. He's willing to provide his own unique perspective on the Ukraine situation. He has unique personal perspective, a Jewish perspective, and ultimately his own human perspective. Vlad's going to offer us 10 or 15 minutes of comments, and then we'll shift into question and answer. The Barnert Men's Club and the Men of Fairmount are glad to be doing this jointly, and in a minute, we'll introduce Alan Hockheiser, who's president of the Men of Fairmount. We did have our breakfast in Franklin Lakes at Barnert Temple. I don't know how many people are there because I'm not there. I'm on the West Coast, but we are logistically, we're going to keep everyone muted. We have participants from California, the Berkshires, New York, and Ohio, not to mention New Jersey. We will take Q&A in the chat from anyone who's on the Zoom. And then Alan Hockheiser and I will do our best to see that those questions are asked and moderate them. And I think given past experience doing this, we will not be able to get to all of the questions from the audience, but we will do our very best to make that happen. Alan Hockheiser, would you like to say hello this morning?
Yes, thank you, Bob, and to everybody. Good morning. I'm Al Hockheiser. I'm the president of the Men of Fairmount Temple. And we're very lucky to be having this presentation today from Cantor Lapin. And it's nice where we're able to do events with other men's clubs around the country. And it just goes to show that, you know, there's a lot going on within our organizations. We're very happy to have Cantor Lapin in Cleveland with us now, even though his last stop, he was in Great Neck, he was in New Jersey, and I'm a New Yorker, born and bred, but I've been out here for a while, and we just look forward to this event. I am going to let everybody know that Paul Sobel will be jumping in for me because I am going to have to leave halfway through this presentation, so he'll help out with some of the questions and answers. So thank you, and Bob, I throw it back to you.
Okay, well, thank you again, Alan. I appreciate it. And excuse me, let me just grab my notes. And again, I'm a little bit handicapped here because I'm working off a computer without paper comments and all. First, I thought hello to Vladimir again. Excuse me, and perhaps you could introduce us to the young gentleman that is with you on screen right now.
Thanks, Bob. This is Orly. This is our daughter, our 4-month-old daughter, Orly. And, you know, given the life of a clergy person, Ellie, my wife, Rabbi Ellie Mulbaum, is at the Fairmount Temple Religious School right now, working with our wonderful kids. And I'm here with you, and Orly is here as well. And so at a certain point, you might hear her share her views on Ukraine as well. Thank you.
Very good.
Thank you.
Very
Is it okay
good.
to, Bob, as I'm starting also, if you're able to, if you can make me a co-host, or I just, oh, I think I'm able to share. No, because I'd like to share my screen if possible. If not, it's fine. We can make it work without it. I don't know if you're
Okay,
able to.
Frank Pyack, if you could make Vladimir a co-host, that would be great. Things were a little bit rushed on our end. Unfortunately, I was hoping to get up a couple of maps of Belarus and Ukraine.
I have
but
them.
I don't.
I
Okay,
have them.
great.
So if
Okay.
I'm able to share, once I'm able to share, I'm happy to share a map.
Okay, great. Why don't you begin by giving us your personal story as it relates to what's going on right now?
Sure. Thank you, Bob. I want to just begin with gratitude. What a really privilege it is to be able to share this with my community of Fairmount Temple, with the men of Fairmount, and everybody who is joining us. And thank you for the men of Barnert who are making this possible. Barnert Temple is I want to call it my home congregation, because that's where I decided to be a cantor. That's where I trained to be a cantor, and that's where my family is. So it's what an amazing privilege to be able to share this with the both of you. I want to say this two things right now. First, I want and hope and pray that, you know, this issue, the war with Ukraine, the terror that is happening in that region is incredibly horrific. But what I want and hope is that the programming, this type of programming, we can do on happy occasions as well, on good news, on wonderful news. And so I hope this is the beginning of many possible programs that we'd be able to do together, not just on the negative things and horrific things that are happening in the world, but also on the wonderful things that we can all celebrate together. That's the first thing. The second thing that I'd love to share is that I'm not an expert. I'm not a historian. I'm not a foreign policy expert. I'm just, you know, I just happened to have been born in Belarus in 1981, and my family went through the immigration process and came to America. And so all the things that I'm sharing, it's basically just as a student, as a layperson living in our contemporary modern world. And so I really want to make sure that you understand that I'm not an expert in this, and there are far more worthy individuals who are able to share their perspective on what is happening. She fell asleep, so this is great. So I'm going to sit down for a moment. All right. Bear with me. The other thing that I'd like to start with, and let's see if I'm still not a co-host. All right. So as soon as I'm able to share this, there are 4 organizations that I hope folks are supporting as everything is happening in Ukraine. The 4 charities that I feel should be highlighted, and I'm just going to run them down right now. This is a question that I get a lot. What can we do? What can I do right now? I think the thing that we can do is support financially the organizations that are doing so much of the work. And the 4 kind of organizations that are important to me is HIAS, Hebrew Immigrant Aid Society, formerly known as the Hebrew Immigrant Aid Society, HIAS.org. They have folks on the ground. They're doing incredible work. They're the organizations that is, you know, half responsible for me being in the United States. There's the American Jewish Joint Distribution Committee, the JDC. It's a leading Jewish humanitarian organization. It continually provides care and services for probably thousands upon thousands of Jewish elderly in Ukraine and Belarus and Moldova. They're doing incredible work right now on the ground, on the borders in Poland, helping with refugees. There's a 3rd and 4th organization. 3rd is Razom for Ukraine. Razom was an organization, R-A-Z-O-M, and either after this is over, once I'm able to be a co-host, I can email you all of this with the links. And Razom means in Ukrainian together. And it was a organization that began in 2014 after the nonviolent protests and revolution that happened in Ukraine. And they've been doing incredible work, especially in the last month, in helping refugees and people within Ukraine. And then the fourth, and this shouldn't come to surprise to many of you, is the World Union for Progressive Judaism, the WPJ. You can go to wpj.org and support all the work that they're doing with progressive Jewish communities. And there are so many in Ukraine that have been affected. Okay. I was born in 1981 in Belarus. Let's see. Okay. At that point, it was part of the former Soviet Union. My family immigrated to the United States in 1989. I was 8 years old. As many of the Jewish refugees that were Jewish immigrants that were leaving at the time, we lived for a certain time in Poland, then we lived in Austria, then we lived in Italy, waiting for our next steps to enter the United States. My family always had the kind of the freedom and the ability to go to Israel if they chose to, but my parents did not. And they didn't want to go to Israel because they didn't want my sister and me to be conscripted into the army. That was a fear in Russia, and they did not, that to them was not, it was not a possibility. And so my family was able to come to the United States, and we settled in Philadelphia. I was going to share some pictures and some photos. My childhood consisted of numerous trips to Ukraine. Gomel, Belarus, where I was born. Gomel is about 100 miles north of the Ukrainian border. We're about 120, 140 miles from Chernobyl. So I'm sure everybody heard of Chernobyl. And Chernobyl, the nuclear accident happened on April 26, 1986. So I was there when it happened, and our city, Gomel, was very, very much affected by it. I could spend a whole session just on Chernobyl alone. I'm not going to go there today, because we only have, right, you said 15 minutes, which I think a lot of that is up now. And we had relatives, friends all over Ukraine. It was basically, in a way, like a travel destination. Ukraine is an incredibly beautiful country, and it's got, in the southern part of Ukraine, you have Odessa and the port cities, and you have the Black Sea area, which is one of the most beautiful area. In fact, one of the most amazing things. Do you know the song "O Sole Mio," which kind of everyone sings that a lot? That song was written about the sunset over the Black Sea, and so the composer of that song wrote it in Ukraine when he was visiting Ukraine. Everyone thinks it's about Italy. Yes, it's an Italian love song, but it was written about Odessa, Ukraine. Just a little kind of point of if that ever comes up on Jeopardy.
Vlad, your co-host.
Your co-host now.
Oh, thank you. All right, so let me share. Fantastic. All right. Thank you. Thank you. All right. Let's see if I can share this. Can you guys see this? Can everyone see? All right. So here are these are the 4 organizations that I hope that you all support. Let me go back to the map. Here we are looking at a map of Ukraine right now. So if you see Belarus, do you see my little pointer right here? This is Gomel. And then here's Chernobyl. Here's the Odessa. And my relatives basically were all over. So we would constantly spend time in Kiev. We would spend time in Lviv, or at that point in Russian, it's Lvov. We'd spend time in Zhytomyr. Ukraine was basically like our backyard for Belarus. And that is the place where we spent so much of my summer and so many memories with my family members. And for me, and my childhood memories of Ukraine are just a travel destination. And it was just this beautiful, beautiful space. Here's my family. This is a couple of years before we left to go to emigrate. So you'll see, I think this is August of 1985 or 86, possibly. I have to confirm.
Vladimir, excuse me, this is Bob Males. Just for clarity,
Yes.
we want to ask, is that you in the sweater?
That is me in the sweater. Thank you, Bob, for asking for clarity. You'll see me in my older sister and my parents, Maya and Yakov. And this was probably a couple of years before we left Belarus to come to the United States. So yes, this is one of my favorite pictures. I love it. We don't actually have that many photos from us at that time, so this is a really special one. Okay, so let me stop sharing for a moment. So my association with Ukraine is very heartfelt. To me, it's a place of my childhood. It is a place where I spend so many of my summers and spend so many times with my family and my friends. And so seeing what is happening kind of leading up to it, I didn't think it was possible, but then seeing what has been happening over the last month and more has been heartbreaking. Every morning, every afternoon, reading the news, it's been more and more heartbreaking and incredibly difficult to imagine that this is actually happening in 2022, horrific war, and for really, not for reasons that I at least can comprehend. And so it's been very, very challenging. A little bit of the Jewish history of the area that I just would love to share with you. And a lot of you are aware of this, but I feel like it would be worth it just to go over this. So a little bit of the history of the Jews in Russia in this area. And let me share my screen one more time. All right, can you see this? All right, so the area that we, a lot of our ancestors, if we are Ashkenazi Jews, that came from is called the Pale of Settlement. So the Pale of Settlement was the area where, under the Russian Empire, where Jews were allowed permanent settlement. So it emerged in 1790 under Catherine II. Jews were regarded actually as Russian subjects, and then under Alexander II, reforms were made regarding what they can and cannot do. The Pale of Settlement, which was areas of Poland, of Belarus, of Ukraine, was officially abolished with the start of World War I. Just continued a little bit of history in the middle of the 19th century. In 1827, Nicholas I imposed the compulsory military service for the Jews, and then Jews were expelled. The Pale of Settlement, the areas of Kiev, Sevastopol, which is southern Ukraine, and Nikolaev, Jews were expelled to move more north. And then Nicholas II, who was much more anti-Semitic than his father, Nicholas I, established much stronger anti-Semitic policies. There was the accusations of blood libels and pogroms. There was a large immigration of Jews in 1890, in 1889, 1880s, to Jews to the US and elsewhere. Probably a lot of us can trace our ancestors to the 1890s, who started arriving in the United States. Under the Bolsheviks, the official stance, considering a lot of Bolsheviks who were Jewish, they renounced anti-Semitism and acknowledged the Jewish contribution to society, but most Jewish traditions were suppressed throughout society, and anti-Semitic and sentiments were pretty widespread. Stalin was incredibly anti-Semitic, but World War II basically kind of didn't pause it, because how could you pause it? But World War II basically took over, and they needed the Jews to help them fight. So I'm not going to go into kind of more details there. Just something that I wanted to share, and pertinent, I think, to what's happening in Ukraine. There's an article that was written in Atlantic by, I think, Zarin is the last name. In Russia, the Holocaust was not studied, or it hadn't been studied. The Holocaust, basically, there's no word for the Holocaust. Folks call it the Shoah if they do. So there was no it's interesting to kind of think about Judaism and the Holocaust and how we in America have studied it and perceive and not, I mean, see it. In Russia and Ukraine and Belarus, that is not a point of study. The study of that period of time is World War II, the Great Patriotic War. The Great Patriotic War, World War II, in Russia and Ukraine and Belarus and Moldova and Transnistria and all of the former Soviet republics is something that is just a part of life. It's a part of life. I was in Ukraine twice over the last 10 years. Once I did the Passover, I did Passover Seders as a first year student at Hebrew Union College. I went with Ellie to lead Seders for progressive Jewish communities that were still in Ukraine. And we did that in Crimea, so in the cities of Sevastopol, in Simferopol, and that region is no longer under Ukrainian control, or at least it hadn't been under, even before the war. Russia took it over. And so one of the things that was just so vivid was you drive these streets, you'll have advertisements for, you know, yogurt and sodas and travel, and basically like every third or fourth sign is a memorial to the Great Patriotic War. So this is 2012, 2011. It's continued. The Great Patriotic War colors everything in the history books of the Russians, and there's no mention of the Holocaust. There's a mention of
Lapin, this is Bob Males again. I wanted to just jump in and kind of bring that up to today. So many of us have our roots from that region, and even President Zelensky has Jewish heritage, and we're wondering how that plays out in this situation in Ukraine today.
It's a great question. It's a topsy-turvy world. It's amazing that Ukraine has a Jewish president who is fighting the rhetoric of Putin, who is saying he's denazifying Ukraine. The denazifying, whatever the term that is used, it's so triggering because it's basically Putin is using the Great Patriotic War as this is the right thing to do. Ukraine is filled with Nazis. The propaganda that is filling up the airwaves of Russia is that Ukraine is filled with Nazis. Ukraine is destroying the Russian areas that that are still at least were said to be supporting Russia, and so they're there on a mission to get rid of the Nazis. And then you're thinking, get rid of the Nazis. You have a Jewish president. It's wild to think about. And so actually to that question, I want to share something with you. It's kind of the irony of history. And this is an article from Eliana Adler from Penn State University. I want to share this with you. Mr. Goldberg was visiting his parents when the war started. In order to get back to the young family he had left behind in Tel Aviv for his brief visit to the old country, he had to travel through Russia. When he finally got back home, he described his hair-raising escape and the horrible scenes he witnessed along the way to an aid agency. The agency publicized the story in order to raise money to help those still in harm's way. Refugees streamed across the border, according to Goldberg, some without even shoes on their feet. Others died in bombings along the way. Even once they reached relative safety in Lvov, he witnessed long lines for bread and alarming prices for other necessities. When he finally reached Russian territory, the Jews were suspicious of speaking to a stranger about their government. With help from the British consul, he finally made it out of the war zone and back to his family in May of 1940. This is obviously not the same war. Goldberg and his fellow refugees were fleeing east from German invasion instead of west from the Russians. They were also Polish Jews trying to avoid Hitler's forces instead of a mixed multitude of Ukrainians escaping Putin's. The situations vary in multiple ways, and yet we cannot help but note the similarities. In the news and on the street, everyone suggests parallels to World War II. For many Jews, the resonances are especially strong. The images of streams of refugees, of exhausted mothers carrying their children, and of bombed out buildings in those particular landscapes touch a deep chord. When on the first day of this terrible conflict, the prominent Polish journalist and former dissident Adam Michnik declared, "We are all Ukrainians now." His word captured the zeitgeist of a rare consensus of international thinkers and leaders. For many Ashkenazi Jews, his words could be taken quite literally. Their ancestors, our ancestors, sojourned on Ukrainian lands for centuries, whether or not they were considered to be Ukrainian. Even though few alive today remember the start of the Second World War, let alone the refugee crises of the First World War and Russian Civil War, many carry a cultural memory of fleeing from these very lands. This is certainly true for the most recent group of migrants who came after collapse of the USSR. Yet it is misleading to allow analogies and inherited trauma to distort understandings of the present conflict. As a historian, I appreciate the increased discussion of historical information over the past month. As a human being and a Jew, I feel the force of the images of the war in Ukraine we have all seen. But comparing Putin to Hitler is not only inaccurate, it's counterproductive. If we can learn from the past, let us focus on care on the refugees. While of course each conflict engenders its own forms of terror, refugees have certain basic and immediate needs. And then the author goes to talk about the help for refugees, which I hope we all focus on. Zelensky being a Jew is a source of pride. It's a source of irony in incredible ways. And it's a source of hope, really. You know, each time I see the interviews and the media appearances, there's this source of hope that maybe somehow a miracle will happen, and Russia will retreat or something. So it's definitely something new to have a Jewish leader who's not hiding from his Jewishness, to be able to be doing this. Thank you for spotlighting me.
What is the role?
One second, Bob. Just the one thing that I want to say is something that just happened in Russia. Vladimir Zhirinovsky, who was a hardline, I'm going to say something not very Cantor-like, a hardline jerk. I was going to use a different word. He just passed away from a long-term disease, which was clearly COVID. He was a staunch nationalist, a very, very anti-Jewish, anti-ethnic politician who ran for president numerous times. He just passed away. Zhirinovsky's parents were Russian. His father was Jewish, survived the Holocaust. He had relatives that died in the Holocaust. He denounced his Judaism, became, he was the supporter of the Russian Orthodox Church, but just one of the most disgusting politicians that you can imagine. And he passed away a couple of days ago, and his funeral was earlier this past week. And so there are images that came out of Putin being, I think these images just came out yesterday, I saw, of Putin that came to his funeral and bought this giant bouquet of roses and put it on his not tombstone, actually, his casket. And that image with Zelensky. And so here's somebody who did not, folks denounce his Judaism, that's fine. It's not about that. It's about the things that he did as a politician. And here's Zelensky, who is this leader who is offering hope to the world and is trying to protect his country and is a proud Jew. It's through the Jewish lens is incredibly powerful. It's incredibly powerful. And I don't think we've ever had that. I've never had that in my life. I've never had that in my life. And so that's what's giving me hope. All right, sorry, Bob, I interrupted you.
Oh, that's okay. I'd like to encourage people in the chat box to send their questions in, and Paul Sobel and I will try to moderate them and bring them to you, Vladimir. And also, I wanted to ask you what the relationship is today between Belarus and Russia, and how Belarus is playing into the Ukraine situation, the Ukraine war.
So Belarus has had a dictator for the last 30 years since it became its own kind of independent country. It hasn't really been that independent from Russia. Their president is Lukashenko, who has been basically a dictator. He has controlled power in Belarus for the last, I think, 30 plus years. And he, I think, is his goal is for his son to be the next leader of Belarus. Belarus has not, has had normal relations with Ukraine. There's been some conflicts given the border area, but they are a staunch supporter of Russia. And so through the news reports, you kind of are seeing that a lot of the Russian troops are stationed in Belarus or kind of retreating to Belarus, then going back. Belarus is a supporter historically of Russia, and they're going to continue to be the supporter of Russia. Anytime there's been any kind of taste of protest or revolution, it gets quickly squashed. If you remember, don't remember if it was maybe a couple years ago where there was a dissident, they had a dissident reporter who basically was who had to leave Belarus and hide out in another country, and they took a flight from one European country to another European country, and once they were flying over Belarus, they made the Belarusian they had their army basically take the flight down into Belarus. They arrested the reporter. This was British, it wasn't British Airlines. It was a different company. They arrested the reporter and then they led the plane flight. There's like an international outcry. I don't remember exactly what had happened. Belarus is a staunch supporter of Russia. And, historically, Ukrainians and Belarusians they haven't, they're like cousins that don't really get along. But right now, Belarus is on the Russian side. Countries like Moldova are not, but there's more to that. I want to get into that. I know that there is we can talk about that another time. One thing that I do want to share in a question was just asked of me. Do I still have family there, and who do I talk to? That yes. Oh, hi, hey, Orly. Yes. So I have family in Russia proper, and this has been a challenge. I have aunts and uncles and cousins and new babies on the way. I have very close relatives who live in Kaliningrad. Kaliningrad is on the Baltic, in the Baltic part. It's actually not. There's Russia itself, and then there's a little part that's not far from Finland and Lithuania near the Baltic Sea. And so my relatives are there. Leading up to the war, no one believed that it would happen. My parents are in almost daily conversation with my aunts and uncles. Since the war has started and since the invasion of Ukraine has started, their rhetoric changed. In the beginning, they were basically spewing the propaganda that they were being fed on TV. And since that, the conversations have completely changed to, we can't talk about it. There's this fear that phone lines, emails, everything is being listened to. And so that my relatives are not, they're saying everything is great. The stores are full. We're continuing to live our lives. We're not going to talk about Ukraine. And our understanding is that they're not going to talk about Ukraine because they can't. There's an intense fear. And Russia has this history of, you are not of not sharing your public opinions, even with relatives. And so many of my relatives have dual citizenship with Israel. And so we hope that if things do get dire, which in a way, there's a part of us that wants things to get dire in Russia, so that there's this force, but the Russian people have endured hundreds and hundreds of years of suffering. So what makes 2022 different from, which is a terrible thing to think about, but hopefully there will be a way out for my family, and it's something that's very close to my heart. All right. Bob, do you want to ask me the questions, or you want me to look? Maybe I'll let you be the moderator.
Okay. From Len Diamond at Barnert. Since the breakup of the USSR, do the people in the now independent countries still feel part of Russia, what is now Russia?
So independent countries like Moldova and Belarus and Is that the question?
Yes, yes.
So when I was there in 20, let's see, last time I was there was a couple of years ago. There were folks that did share that, yes, they would love to go back to the good old days when there's some people that would probably be happy with Russia being in charge. And then there's the younger generation in the 2014 revolution in Ukraine, the peaceful revolution that basically started establishing a modern Ukraine with ties to Europe, with strong ties to Europe. And it's more of the Western side, the side that's closer to Europe, that they're the ones that have been calling for just intense independence. And that's when I talk about the charity of Razom, that's the charity that I hope folks will continue supporting. So I'm not a pollster. I don't know what the specific numbers. I can just share you anecdotal evidence, and I'll share two stories. I spent some time in Moldova a couple years ago in Chisinau, which is its capital. Moldova, they speak either Moldovan, which is Romanian. It's not. It's like a dialect of Romanian language, or they speak Russian. Now, I came there actually as a translator. I was working with one of our professors at Hebrew Union College. He's doing these Jewish heritage trips. And everywhere I went to in Chisinau, I thought, okay, I speak Russian. I don't speak Romanian. And so I tried to speak Russian with everyone. There was rare of an instance where people wanted to speak Russian to me. They all knew how to speak Russian. Russian was their first language, but they were so anti-Russian that they didn't want to speak the language. And so the folks wanted to speak Romanian, Moldovan. And so I found it very difficult because I don't speak Romanian, and they looked at me as a Russian, even though I wasn't there representing Russia at all. And so that was very difficult. That's story number one. About years ago when I was a student, kind of my last or second to last year at the Cantorial School at Hebrew Union College, we had a visit from the progressive rabbi from the Kiev congregation, Rabbi Alexander. His last name escapes me. He came in on he came to the United States on a fundraising trip, and one of his stops was Hebrew Union College to work with the students and to tell them about the Jewish communities in Ukraine. Lovely, lovely man. I came up to introduce myself to him, and I started speaking Russian, and he wouldn't. He would only speak English to me. He said, "I'm sorry, I prefer not to speak Russian." It was so powerful to me because our common language is Russian. He knew Russian. He knows Russian better than English, better than Ukrainian, but he was not going to speak Russian. So that, I think, tells you, or at least some of these anecdotal, I think there's a lot of anti-Russian. There was a lot of anti-Russian sentiment, and I can't imagine what the future, how anybody can support Russia, even those who were supporting Russia, experiencing and seeing what is happening daily, seeing what happened in the train, in the train station a couple of days ago, seeing the missiles that are launching in the hospitals, seeing the pictures that are emerging from Ukraine daily. I cannot imagine how anyone in the former Soviet republics can support the Putin regime.
It's difficult for us as Americans, I think, for at least people who are born here and always lived here, to understand what it's like to have your country, your sovereign country, attacked by another country. Belarus had a long relationship with Russia, but you're very close to this area. What is your sense of what that's like?
None of us can imagine it, which is great. I mean, it's great that we can't imagine it. It's great that we can't imagine it. But for a lot of us Jews, the trauma is in our blood. It's in the past 100 years. Things like this have happened. Countries have invaded other countries. And we're blessed to be able to be living at a time and in a place where this is not happening right now, where we are. and yet the people can't say the same in Ukraine. People can't say the same, and so it's, in a way, it's history, a little topsy-turvy, but repeating itself. And again, I'll say for reasons that are absolutely not, I can imagine, and we can guess, and we can read this kind of in between the lines, but it's not clear. I will say, kind of going back to what I said in the beginning, Ukraine is an incredibly agriculturally rich country. Their soil is known as, it's called black soil. It's called the breadbasket of at least Eastern Europe. It's called the breadbasket of Europe. It has the grain of Ukraine goes all over Europe and the world. And it's incredibly historically rich country. It's a place where there's multi-ethnically has been very important to the world. There's a lot of history in Ukraine, and it's incredibly heartbreaking and scary, and to see that and to learn what's happening there right now. And we're counting our blessings that we are here in this country right now. And as the article that I read, and as what I keep saying, what we can do now is support the refugees that need all the support that they can get.
A few moments ago, you were speaking about Moldova, and a question from Diane, and I'm not sure which community she's from.
I believe that's Fairmount Temple, Diane Lapin.
Okay. She said Moldova is a place of refuge for many fleeing Ukrainians, yet it's not a member of NATO, which I think her inference is that would make it safer there. What is Moldova's situation with regard to the invasion?
Moldova is one of the poorest countries in Europe. Moldova is incredibly poor. Moldova is, I spent some time in Moldova in the last 7-8 years, as I mentioned. By accepting Moldova into the European Union and NATO, again, this is a personal idea. They don't, NATO and the European Union don't get much out of it. In fact, they kind of just get a country that is incredibly needy to support. And so I think there's a lot of politics behind kind of them joining that. Again, I can only share my personal anecdotes, and from the Jewish lens, Moldova has had a lot of Jews there, and had a lot of Jews who left. And I can share that the last time I was there, it's not going to answer a question, but I'm just going to share the story. I went on a Jewish heritage experience to Moldova, and one of the visits that we went was the Jewish Community Center of Chisinau. To get into to get to that space, you have to go through an unmarked building, through 5 levels of security. So there's no name like this is the Jewish Community Center of Chisinau or Moldova. You kind of have to know where you're going. You go through this unmarked building, then you go through basically airport security. Then you go through another level of security where they take your picture, your information, and then you finally go through into the courtyard where you finally see the sign for the Jewish Center of Moldova, of Chisinau. And then the Jewish Community Center has what any JCC has. They have adult learning programs. They have an adult daycare center, a child daycare center, and it was incredible to me to kind of go through that security to get into this center. I remember going through various Jewish heritage sites on Moldova, sites where terrible atrocities during World War II happened, which had markers, and we would be talking about them. And we would have these, I would call like thugs just staring at us, just watching what we're doing. There's an incredible distrust in Moldova of Russians. There's a distrust of Jews. There's, it's a challenging area, but the fear, Diane, this is interesting. If Moldova is not become part of NATO or and gets the support from Europe, then it's on the pathway with basically with what's happening with Ukraine, what's to say that Moldova is not next?
Another interesting question from Diane, which refers back to something you were speaking about earlier, your relatives in Russia who aren't really able to talk about anything right now. She says polls in Russia show enormous support for Putin's war, and I think many of us have read that. There's a lot of propaganda there. The free press has been crushed. Would anyone in Russia give an honest answer to a pollster if asked? So should we be trusting the polls that we're reading about support for Putin?
Absolutely not. I would not trust anything that's coming out of the Russian press. Absolutely not. Every poll, everything is controlled by the state media. Every news item is controlled. And if you publicly state something that's against them, you disappear. I mean, you can see instances of that all over right now. There's no dissidence. There's nothing that's happening against the war that we can see from any Russian media, and any independent media that existed. Putin's been getting rid of them over the last 10 years. Anything that was a startup, gone.
Bob, John Messer has a question, and before that, Anita Gray has an interesting comment that we might want to take a look at, and that is that she receives a daily newsletter, Medusa, written by independent Russians who left Russia recently because of the press crackdown. And there's a link here for anyone that wants it. The URL is www.medusa.io. John, go ahead.
Hi, John.
You're muted.
There you are. You're good.
Paul, I actually don't have a question. For some reason, it keeps automatically raising my hand, so ignore that.
Well, it's good to see you, John and Lauren. Hi.
Yeah, you look marvelous.
Nice to see you.
Yeah,
Thank you for
sorry to
doing this.
interrupt.
No worries. I'm looking at some of the other questions in the chat. Oh yeah, so okay. Go ahead, Bob. I'm sorry. Did we lose Bob? We're still, everybody's still here, right? Just wave so I can see you. Okay. All right. Very good. All right. I just keep thinking about, we're here together, and this is so wonderful to be together to be talking about this, and to be talking about something so painful. Oh, you're okay, baby. To be talking about something so painful, and something that's happening as we speak, in a place where a lot of our ancestors are from, and it's incredible to see. In some ways, and again, I keep repeating myself, history repeating itself in a topsy-turvy way. It's really, really incredible. And I worry, my immediate worry is for my relatives and the people that I care about. My next worry is for all the refugees and the folks that have been displaced, for the people that have died in this unnecessary war, and continuing to be hurt by what is happening. And through the Jewish lens, and what our Jewish response is, as we are able to, is to help support the refugees, to help however way we can. I know that there's folks that are traveling to Poland to support refugees. I know there's clergy groups and federation groups that are going there with supplies and with financial help. And so I'm grateful, and I think that's where our energy needs to be going. We can't control the Russian media or what governments do or don't do, but we can support people in the people that are hurting the most.
I have a question for you, Cantor. What's to stop Russia from just turning around, using all the forces at their disposal, and just going back in and taking over Ukraine, annexing Ukraine? And who will stop it? Who can stop it realistically?
You're asking the wrong person.
I don't need to be a pessimist.
I think, we can see all the sanctions that have started are starting, I believe, to affect Russia, and ultimately, I think is going to really, really affect it without us really knowing how deeply it affects. But then again, as I said, Russia and the Russian people have been hurt and squashed for hundreds and hundreds of years. This is like this is a country that doesn't mind hurting its own people to get the things that the leaders feel like they need to get. So I don't know what's we can talk about NATO, the support from NATO and the European countries and the United States, and the giving of weapons and all of that. But that leads us into some scary scenarios, which I think everyone is trying to avoid. But using our imaginations, we can see that actually happening. So it's pessimistic, Paul, indeed, and scary. But we need to continue to hope and pray that it will not come to that.
Thank you. I agree. Carl Horowitz has a question, as does Wendy Leatherbury. Curious in your comment about how there's no word for the Holocaust, yet we keep hearing about Holocaust survivors in Ukraine.
A decades-long war of attrition.
Were or are there underground ways in which Jews learn about the Holocaust in former Soviet countries?
I think now in former Soviet countries that they were learning, like once they got rid of the Soviet Union ended, I think that folks did start learning about, at least I know in Ukraine they did, or at least they started in some of the history curricula. In Russia, I don't believe so. I think people learned about the relatives that died, the relatives that died because they were Jewish, not because this was a mass kind of programmatic, like planned execution of Jews, the Holocaust. So I think that there's personal family stories and family history, but not as a whole. The article, I think Paul Sobel, Alex Zeldin in The Atlantic, it's a couple of chats up. If you click on it, it has a fascinating kind of background on actually both the Russian perspective on the Holocaust and the one that comes from Volodymyr Zelensky's bringing up, because he had relatives that perished in the Holocaust in camps, and so it's fascinating to kind of see that in that light. I'm trying to catch your chats as well. Yeah, I want to also share this, and this is again from a Jewish perspective. It's been very odd to me, to see all of the Ukrainian flags and all of the Ukrainian support all over. And I share this because my family left Belarus and left Ukraine because of the severely terrible anti-Semitism, the history of the anti-Semitism. And, at times when I remember hearing the Ukrainian language, to me, it was almost like, it felt anti-Semitic, even though, as a child, we escaped from these people. These are the people that I remember as a kid coming home to my house, to our apartment in Gomel. We had swastikas on our door, drawn, several times. I remember the swastika symbol drawn on our door. I remember my sister coming home with dirt in her hair because somebody called her a dirty Jew. we left Russia, we left Belarus, we left Ukraine. And I remember, I'm just, you know, and the word victory to Ukraine to me, like signified anti-Semitism, victory Ukraine, because we don't want Jews here. And so kind of seeing Slava Ukraina, you know, victory to Ukraine and the Ukrainian flags, this nationalistic, I completely understand. Oh my gosh, yes. In the 2022 lens, we're supporting Ukraine. We want Ukraine to be a victor in this horrific invasion. But I still am feeling this like reserve, because I know the history, the Jewish history in Ukraine, and it was intensely anti-Semitic. And I keep thinking about this comment from my teacher when we were in the streets of Odessa. We were talking about World War II and the severe anti-Semitism in the region. There were documents then. You know, anti-Semitism was so prevalent in Ukraine, everybody kind of knew about it. And in the streets of Odessa, Jews would be tortured. They would be like, absolutely, this is rough, but they would be tortured. And Ukrainians like have this deep history of hate towards Jews. And so it's been a little complicated to see all of these flags. I'm kind of being fully open with you as a Jewish immigrant living in America. Maybe it's all the trauma of my childhood years. And at the same time, I just had this moment. I was officiating at a bat mitzvah last week, and the photographer for the bat mitzvah was Jewish. And we have this beautiful ceremony that we do before the bat mitzvah itself with a certificate signing, which I learned from Rabbi Elise Frischman. And the photographer, I introduced myself to the photographer. His name was Igor. I'm Vladimir. And I said, hi, it's nice to meet you. And in Russian, I asked him, do you speak Russian? And the first words out of his mouth was Slava Ukraini. So victory to Ukraine. And then he said, I'm from Moscow. And I said, I'm from Belarus. And he said, well, first we have to identify now that we are pro-Ukraine before we can continue this our conversation. This was a really odd social interaction. Clearly we're both Jewish. Clearly we're both of Russian descent. And so before we can continue our conversation, we have to identify that we are pro-Ukraine. It was very, very odd, but I wanted to share that with you.
Cantor Lapin, this is Bob. I'm not sure you can still hear me or not. My connection is unstable.
I can hear you.
Okay. One of the questions, which I think is a good wrap-up question for us, is how do you think this will play out? Look in your crystal ball. Will there be a firm ending, or will this be a war of attrition? Will Russia be satisfied taking the eastern part of Ukraine, and then who knows what would happen from there? What's in your head about how this may resolve?
Oh, can we end on something better? We need to end on a concluding question. It's a little easier. Thanks,
Okay,
Bob.
let's talk about.
No. I will share. There's like two sides. There's a side that hopes that the Russia will retreat and maybe regroup and rethink what is happening. I just given what is happening, and you can see it. I think it's going to continue. It's not going to stop until Putin is not in power anymore, and that is not evident that's going to happen anytime soon. And so I think they might be satisfied with taking some of the regions of Ukraine, and it's going to then maybe regroup, and then they're going to try again. I don't know. I hope that lives are going to stop being destroyed because of what this is, and I hope that happens soon. If I had to look in my crystal ball, as you said, I don't think that's going to be the case, sadly.
Bob, this is Paul. If I could throw out, something that I think is somewhat positive and we can all be proud of. What Cantor Lapin said about the latent anti-Semitism and the mistrust between the Ukrainians and the Jewish Ukrainians, is something that's been on a lot of people's minds. Yet, Israel has been a huge supporter of the Ukrainian resistance. And they have been sending millions and millions of dollars and multiple shipments of medical assistance. I mean, setting up field hospitals. So as our former First Lady, Michelle Obama, said, when they go low, we go high. It's wonderful that we are giving the world, that Israel is giving the world the opportunity to see that the Jews do what is morally right and is something for us to be proud of. And, we've all heard the expression growing up, dirty Jew. The Cantor said his sister had that. Israel is not giving the world a chance here to say they're dirty Jews. And that is something that is a blessing.
Thank you, Paul. And I'll share also, I spoke recently to a Ukrainian lady, a Russian Orthodox lady. And again, my instinct is always to not trust because of just my childhood. But I remember she mentioned, Paul, exactly what you said. She said she's seeing the support that Israel is sending to Ukrainians and to her family in Ukraine and to the refugees. And she's so grateful to Jews, she said, who have been hurt for so many years like this, and now we are experiencing that ourselves. Which I was silent for that moment. That mistrust still exists because I know, because I can't shake of that. That's like a part of my blood. But I was very touched by what she said. And Arthur, to your point, you said, I see valiance of our other favorite Volodymyr, and thank you. And the people of Ukraine, that anti-Semitism may also die in this region, another place no one ever dreamed where hate would fade. Can you imagine? It's really powerful to think about that. And I'm a cynic. I'm a cynic because of where I come from, but I see these moments of hope for the Jews through this horrific conflict. I'm looking at the time. It's 10:50. I want to share again my gratitude to the men of Barnert Temple, to the men of Fairmount Temple, to these two communities that I love, and I hope, please, let's make this happen. That our next time that we meet, that we are talking about something celebratory and something positive. And may this be beginning of maybe programming that we can do together throughout many, many years. So thank you to putting this together. And I hope Alan is feeling better. Len, I hope, please send my best to Alan. And I hope we are able to really make some great programming happen.
We will make a recording of this available to both communities. And we want to thank you so much for your time and efforts. And in the recording, it will repeat, obviously, the organizations that you pointed out to us earlier, so that people can participate and contribute in the ways that they can. Excuse me. So we wanted to thank you so much for sharing your perspective today. It was really enlightening, and it also gave all of us who know you in so many different ways another perspective, another facet of the diamond of Cantor Vladimir Lapin. Thank you.
Yes, absolutely. Your heart and your mind, and of course your voice, are a wonderful gift to all of us. And on behalf of MFT, Chag Sameach Pesach.
Thank you.
And
Happy
our best
Passover.
Our best wishes from Barnert Temple to all for a wonderful Passover also. And I've been asked to thank Kathy Hecht, Susan Esserman, and Jen Sauer for, at the very last minute, making this happen. Technically, I don't know what happened, but they pulled some magic off so that both communities could participate. And I believe that we had over 80 people participating at different points this morning. So thank you to everyone for joining us. Cantor Lapin, thank you, and thank you to your beautiful daughter.
I know, right? Look at she deserves all the thanks. She slept through this whole thing.
She was amazing.
We're not going
Thank
to give
you,
her any
everyone.
trauma. Thank you, everybody. It's so good to
Bye.
see all of you.
So good to see you, Vlad. Thank you so much.
Absolutely. Thank you. Take care.